Hi all, Mike Landry here. In this video, I'd like to go over some elements of an Excel data set that you can use to upload to SPSS, as well as the variable view in SPSS. So first of all, this is a data set, and what we have is we have our variable names on the top row. I use all capital letters. I try to keep these under about 12 characters because if we have a long variable name, as you can see, it makes our columns wider. And if we take this, analyze it, and then copy it into Word, we can often run out of space with large columns. So again, top row, variable names, all capitals, and try to keep those short. Everything else, if you notice on this spreadsheet, is just numerical data. There's no shading, there's no borders, there's no notes up on the right side or down below. And that's because if I put anything down here, anything at all, SPSS will think it's part of the data set when we go to upload that. So we don't want to do that. So just real simply, variable names on the top row. There are other ways you can do this. I just find this to be the easiest way to do it. Variable names on the top row, everything else numerical data. SPSS only reads the first sheet when we upload it, so we can have a second sheet for our coding. And here you can see I have my variable names, different levels of data. I'll go over those on the SPSS sheet. And then when it's ordinal data, I have my coding, such as for BMI group, 0 means they're underweight, 1 is normal weight, so forth and so on. With nominal data, I do the same thing. If it's a condition and the person doesn't have it, I use a 0. That's just my preference. So for diabetes, I'll put 0 as not a diabetic, and 1 has that diagnosis. So that's a simple review of the data set in Excel that we can load to SPSS. I also always have a third sheet back here where I can just write any kind of notes that I want to make while collecting data of anything that comes up that I might want to jog my memory. It's very important that we code our data and have what those code numbers mean so that we can refer to it. It's also important because SPSS can only read numbers below that top variable line. So Excel, top row, variable names only. Our data is here. Everything else is clear. And so I took that, and in another video I show you how to do this. I took that data set, uploaded to SPSS, and we get something that looks very similar. Variable names across the top row, all of our data points here, and each row represents one participant, such as row 1 is participant 1, that was a 20-year-old, had education level 1, and so forth and so on. And if you notice at the bottom, we have 2 tabs. What we're seeing now is the data view. We have to be in the data view if we're going to do any kind of analysis on this data. But SPSS also wants us to fill out a form called variable view. So when we click on that, we get a screen that looks like this. And so I just wanted to go over each of these columns quickly to tell you what's there, what I use, what you can use, and what based on your preferences. SPSS automatically provides the name of our variables, so we see that under name. These are the variables I have listed in the data view. SPSS often will throw in other variables if I go out beyond that column, and I can just come back and delete these later. I just haven't done that yet. The next thing is the type, and SPSS allows us to call variables different types. I always leave the default, which is numeric. I find that works out fine for me. You can look at these and change them as you like. A string variable type is simply some kind of identification number. It's typically something we're not going to analyze. So that helps to differentiate that. Width, you could click on the width and actually change the width with the little arrows. But width is the number of characters that will be allowed in a variable, such as this is a 4-digit type variable. And if you notice, SPSS always defaults to 8. So if you have any questions, I think 8 would be plenty for almost anything I've ever done. But you'll see some are 1, and that's because those are nominal data, or ordinal data will have only a few, because those are going to be 1 number, maybe 2 numbers, something like that, typically. But if you're not sure, just you can put an 8 for all these, or don't change whatever SPSS gives us. Decimals, I can change the number of decimals in the variable. If I want whole numbers, I'll put a 0 so that there's no decimals. If I want to limit to one decimal place, I'll put a 1. For some things you might want 2, and I think that's the default setting on SPSS, although I have found sometimes when I enter a variable, it'll give me a string of about 8 decimal places, which is often too many if you're not doing something that requires that level of precision. So I simply go back in and adjust it down to something more in line with what I want. So you can do that. You can adjust the decimal places if you see too many decimal places in your data view. Label. So we talked about keeping our variable names short so that our columns are narrow, that they don't go beyond the width of a page if we convert something into a Word document later with the output from SPSS. This label is actually where we can go in and type out the whole name for that. So if that was of interest to me, and it might be of interest to some professors who would want you to turn an assignment, it's not something I use. It's not that important to me, but for label right here, I could click on this and just write out identification. Maybe here I'd put age in years or something of that value. Values are, if we click on these, what we get is, let me take one that's ordinal level. Our BMI group, I referred to that earlier. This is where I can go in SPSS and put that a value of 0 is equal to underweight and save that, and 1 is equal to normal weight and things like that. Again, I don't use this because I have that information in my Excel data set. So I typically upload a data set to SPSS, do the analysis, take that, and put it into a Word document, and then I'm not working in SPSS per se. I'm working in Excel and Word, so that's why I prefer it that way. Missing is data. If you have data that's missing, if for some reason a number's not recorded, you can determine what you want SPSS to code that. For example, if you want SPSS to put a 0 anytime there's missing data, then I wouldn't use it to use as one of the codes for nominal or ordinal level data. So that's what missing is. Columns is actually the width, the spatial width of a column. And so we can adjust that as we like. SPSS defaults to 11. I've never had an issue with that. Alignment has to do with justification. You could see that SPSS typically defaults to a right setting for our numerical information, but you can change anything to left, right, and center if that's something of interest to you. You just go in and justify it accordingly. I'll leave that one as right. We'll click on that in sets. I'm going to skip measurement real quickly. I'm going to come back to that. Role is an interesting column, and I have to admit I've never used this, but you can change the role from input to any of these other roles that you might want to do to further clarify your variable. I find leaving it input works fine. My main interest in the variable view, for me personally, is of course the variable name. We want that, but we also want to have this measurement level, because if you don't have the right measurement level, if it's scale data and you put nominal data, you might go to do an analysis, and SPSS will send you an error message that you can't do that test with that level of data. So I wanted to go over this really quickly. So as we notice, when we click on this, SPSS only gives us 3 choices. And we have so many other names I've used over the many years I've studied and taught statistics, that it's interesting that SPSS gives us 3. Nominal, of course, means name. These are name groups, things like race, gender, diagnosis for patients, anything that's a word that doesn't have a difference in hierarchical value, except we use nominal variables, nominal level data, when we have a dichotomous nominal variable. So if we have smoking history and it's a 0 that they don't have a history of smoking and 1 that they do and nothing else, those are still name groups. That comes out as nominal data, name groups. Ordinal means order. It's data that's in words that has various amounts of the variable. So if my variable was satisfaction and I had a Likert scale and I wanted to code everybody as being very dissatisfied, dissatisfied, neutral, satisfied, or very satisfied, that's ordinal data, I would want to make sure that that variable was labeled as ordinal. Scale is anything that's numeric. If you use numbers to measure a variable and without words, then it's scale data. So the interesting thing is I learned other names for data, and I'm sure you have too. Categorical data is a term I no longer use, but that's a mashup of nominal and ordinal data. And I think it's very important to clarify which we have. So I would rather, when I write, say nominal and ordinal data than categorical data, to be very clear about that. Because there are things you can do with ordinal data that you can't do with nominal data. One's a median. We obtain medians as a measure of central tendency in ordinal data, but not in nominal data. Scale data, I've used terms like cardinal, and you all probably know what these mean. Cardinal data, interval data, ratio data, continuous data, discrete data, which are all numbers. SPSS says, we treat all of these the same, so we call it scale data. To me, it's kind of a moot point to determine if, like I used to when I was first taking statistics, is this a continuous variable or a ratio variable? It doesn't matter. If it's numbers only, it's scale data. And so the point here with this is that if I have a variable like BMI that is a number, and I want to run, say, a t-test with that as a dependent variable, then I need to make sure that this is scale data. If it's nominal data and I try to run the t-test, SPSS is going to prevent me from doing that. So if you get that kind of error message that you can't run that test with that level of data, you might want to come and make sure that this is coded properly. When we're finished with the variable view, we can just simply click back on the data view and we're ready for our analysis. That completes this video. I hope that this information has been of value to you. Bye for now.